Bennett Walsh had forgotten what it felt like to hope for anything beyond his daughter's next smile. At 38, his hands bore the calluses of a man who had rebuilt his life from blueprint to hammer, trading architectural dreams for the immediate need to be present. 4 years had passed since the night Victoria's car had slid on black ice, since the world had contracted to the size of an 8-year-old girl who needed her father more than he needed his grief. Ruby had her mother's auburn hair and the kind of perceptive, green eyes that seemed to read the unspoken truths adults tried to hide behind forced smiles, and careful lies dot the invitation to Pinewood Bistro had come from his brother Marcus, delivered with the insistence of someone who believed that 4 years was long enough to mourn, long enough to exist in the margins of life. Bennett had agreed only because Ruby had found the note and asked with that devastating innocence if he was going to find someone who could help him be happy again. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that happiness felt like a betrayal, that moving forward meant leaving Victoria somewhere behind, that his heart had learned to function on just enough to survive, but not enough to truly live? Now standing outside the bistro entrance, watching snow begin to dust the sidewalks of downtown Portland, Bennett questioned every decision that had led him to this moment. Inside, Christmas lights twinkled against dark wood paneling, and couples leaned close over candlelit tables. The scene felt borrowed from someone else's life, a future he had stopped believing was meant for him. Celeste Monroe sat at table 14, her posture immaculate despite the anxiety coiling in her stomach. 33 and impossibly composed, she had built her reputation as one of Portland's most formidable corporate attorneys on the foundation of never letting anyone see her vulnerable. 3 years ago, she had walked into her own engagement party to find her fiancé and her closest friend entangled in a coat closet, their betrayal as casual as it was devastating. Since then, she had perfected the art of surface living, attending functions and accepting awards, while keeping every meaningful emotion locked behind professional distance. Her friend Natalie had orchestrated tonight's meeting with the persistence of someone who refused to watch Celeste calcify into complete isolation. One dinner, she had promised. Just see if there's anything worth exploring. Celeste had agreed, partly to silence Natalie's concerns and partly because some desperate part of her wondered if she was capable of feeling anything authentic anymore. Bennett finally entered, his movements hesitant, his navy sweater slightly wrinkled. He spotted Celeste immediately, her blonde hair swept into an elegant twist, her grey silk blouse speaking of boardrooms and controlled negotiations. She looked expensive and untouchable, and Bennett felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settle across his shoulders. Their greeting was awkward, handshakes lingering a moment too long, smiles not quite reaching their eyes. Bennett ordered coffee, while Celeste swirled wine she had no intention of drinking. The conversation stumbled through safe territories like weather predictions and holiday traditions, both of them performing the ritual of first date small talk, while their minds catalogued all the ways this evening was confirming their worst expectations. From the restaurant's family section, where crayons and colouring sheets kept younger patrons occupied, Ruby watched her father with the intensity of someone conducting an experiment. She had begged to come along, had promised to stay quietly in the children's area, and Bennett had relented because saying no to Ruby felt like denying the only light in his carefully managed darkness. Ruby noticed things. She saw how her father's shoulders hunched when he left, like he was apologizing for the sound. She observed how the beautiful blonde woman kept touching a silver pendant at her neck, the gesture unconscious and repetitive, like worrying a wound. There was something familiar in the woman's careful distance, something Ruby recognized from the times she watched her father stare at photographs when he thought she was sleeping. The bistro hummed with pre-holiday energy, waitstaff moving efficiently between tables, a pianist in the corner coaxing gentle melodies from an upright piano. Outside, the snow began falling with more purpose, flakes growing fatter and more numerous. The weather service had predicted light accumulation, nothing concerning, but the sky carried the peculiar heaviness that suggested nature had different plans. Bennett attempted another topic, asking about Celeste's work, and she responded with practiced brevity, offering just enough information to seem engaged, while revealing nothing of substance. They were two people expertly avoiding connection, both terrified of what it might cost them. Celeste found herself studying Bennett despite her determination to remain detached. His face carried the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep, the weariness of someone who had learned to function on fumes. But when he mentioned Ruby, when he talked about his daughter's recent obsession with constellation identification, something shifted in his expression. Love, raw and unguarded, transformed him completely. The transformation unsettled Celeste because it reminded her of what she had lost. Not just the relationship, but the capacity to be that vulnerable, that wholly invested in another person's existence. She had spent 3 years congratulating herself on her emotional efficiency, on her ability to navigate life without the liability of deep attachment. Watching this tired man radiate pure devotion to his child exposed the hollowness of her victory. Ruby decided to move closer, abandoning her coloring to slip between bistro tables until she had a better vantage point. Hidden partially behind a decorative pine tree adorned with silver ornaments, she continued her surveillance. The woman her father was struggling to talk to wore sadness, the way some people wore perfume, subtle but persistent. Ruby understood sadness. She carried her own, a mother-shaped absence that sometimes felt like a physical weight. Bennett knocked over his water glass reaching for bread, and the resulting puddle spread across white linen, an accusation of his inadequacy. Celeste helped him mop it up with napkins, their hands briefly touching, and the contact sent something electric through both of them. They pulled away quickly, each unsettled by the unexpected intensity of such a simple moment. The pianist transitioned into a slower melody, something melancholic and beautiful, and Celeste's hand returned to her necklace. The pendant held a tiny photograph of her younger sister Gemma, who had died in a car accident 12 years ago. Christmas had never recovered from that loss, had become instead an annual reminder of absence, and all the ways joy could be stripped away without warning. Bennett saw the pendant, saw the way Celeste's breathing changed when she touched it, and recognized the gesture immediately. He wore his own talisman, Victoria's wedding ring on a chain, beneath his shirt, pressed against his heart like a constant ache. They were both carrying ghosts to this dinner table, both armored in grief they had mistaken for protection. The bistro's lights flickered once, then twice, drawing nervous glances from patrons. Through the tall windows, the snow had intensified into something approaching a whiteout, visibility shrinking to mere feet. The manager appeared with diplomatic apologies, announcing that the city had upgraded to a severe weather warning, that streets were becoming impassable, that anyone who could leave should do so immediately. Bennett stood instinctively, his protective instincts overriding everything else. Ruby needed to get home before this storm became truly dangerous. He turned to gather his daughter and felt his heart stop mid-beat. The children's area was empty, crayons scattered across an abandoned table, Ruby's purple jacket still draped over a chair. The fear that seized him was primal and absolute. Not again, his mind screamed. Not after everything, not Ruby too. He spun toward the entrance and saw what stole his breath completely. The front door stood slightly ajar, snow swirling through the opening, and small boot prints led from the threshold into the white chaos beyond. Bennett roared his daughter's name with such raw terror that the entire restaurant fell silent. Celeste was on her feet instantly, following his gaze, understanding flooding through her with sickening clarity. Without discussion, without hesitation, they both ran for the door. The cold struck like a physical assault, wind stealing breath and vision simultaneously. The snow fell so thick it created a disorienting white void where direction lost all meaning. Bennett's voice cracked as he shouted for Ruby, panic stripping away every carefully constructed control he had built over 4 years of single parenthood. Celeste, shivering violently in her silk blouse and wool slacks that offered zero protection against a blizzard, cupped her hands around her mouth and added her voice to his. She had no logical reason to plunge into this storm for a child she had just learned existed, for a man she barely knew. But logic had abandoned her the moment she saw Bennett's terror. They moved together through the parking lot, checking between cars, behind dumpsters, anywhere a small frightened child might have sought shelter. Bennett's hands shook as he swept snow aside, his mind trapped in a loop of worse scenarios, each more horrifying than the last. This was his nightmare made manifest, the fear that had haunted every moment since Victoria's death, the certainty that he would fail to keep Ruby safe. It was Celeste who spotted the small figure huddled against a parked delivery van, nearly invisible beneath accumulating snow. She grabbed Bennett's arm and pointed, and he was already moving, his body crashing to his knees beside his daughter. Ruby was sobbing, her face red with cold, her small body trembling so violently she could not form words. Bennett gathered her against his chest, wrapped his jacket around her, used his body as a shield against the wind. Celeste arrived seconds later, and without thinking removed her own coat, draping it over Ruby's shoulders, then pressed herself against Bennett's back, adding her body as additional protection. The three of them huddled there, strangers hours ago, now locked together in a desperate fight against nature's indifference. Fighting back toward the bistro felt like moving through concrete, each step requiring deliberate effort. Bennett carried Ruby while Celeste guided them, her hand on his shoulder, both of them leaning into the wind. When they finally stumbled through the entrance, they nearly collapsed, snow sliding from them in chunks, water pooling on polished floors. Staff rushed forward with blankets, with towels, with hot drinks. The manager made the decision to shelter everyone overnight, announcing that the bistro would not risk anyone traveling in these conditions. Bennett sat in a corner booth, Ruby wrapped in multiple blankets, still shaking. He rubbed warmth back into her arms, while his own heart continued its panicked rhythm. Celeste slid into the booth beside them, her expensive outfit ruined, her carefully styled hair plastered to her head, her entire professional facade destroyed. She reached out tentatively and placed her hand on Ruby's small knee, offering comfort that surprised even herself. Ruby looked up at Celeste through tear-wet eyes and said with simple clarity, "You came for me too, just like Daddy." Something profound passed between the adults then, an understanding that bypassed language. Celeste saw not the anxious man who had fumbled through dinner, but a father whose love was so fierce it bordered on sacred. Bennett saw not the distant professional who had seemed untouchable, but a woman capable of running into a blizzard for a child she barely knew. The bistro settled into an uneasy night, families claiming tables, staff distributing whatever comfort they could offer. Battery-powered lanterns cast softer light, transforming the space into something almost timeless. Bennett could not stop checking on Ruby, could not stop reliving those terrible moments of not knowing where she was. Celeste watched him with something dangerously close to tenderness, recognizing the self-recrimination in his eyes. She understood that particular flavor of guilt, had carried it herself after Gemma's death, the endless loop of wondering if things could have been different. She wanted to tell him it was not his fault, that children were unpredictable, that he had found Ruby and brought her back, and that was what mattered. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The gesture startled them both. Bennett looked at their joined hands, then up at Celeste's face, and found there an echo of his own pain. "You lost someone too," he said quietly, not a question, but a recognition. Celeste nodded, her throat tight. "My sister, 12 years ago. Christmas morning, my wife," Bennett whispered, 4 years ago. Christmas Eve, car accident. They sat in silence. To people who had built entire architectures of protection around their wounded hearts, discovering that maybe those walls were not keeping them safe, but keeping them isolated. Ruby, warm now and drowsy, murmured something neither adult caught initially. Celeste leaned closer. "What was that, sweetheart?" "You're not scary anymore," Ruby said sleepily. "You look like Mama did when she smiled at pictures of Daddy." Celeste's eyes filled, and this time she did not try to hide it. Bennett's hand tightened around hers, and they sat there as the storm raged outside, to broken people beginning to believe that maybe broken pieces could still fit together. Across the restaurant, a man named Devon Pierce watched them with narrowed eyes. He had worked with Celeste for 5 years, had pursued her professionally and personally, had been rejected consistently. Seeing her hold hands with this ordinary man, seeing her show vulnerability she had never offered him, Devon felt his ego curdle into something uglier. He had initially been pleased when the storm trapped them all, thinking it gave him opportunity. Now, watching Celeste tend to another man's child with genuine care, Devon decided that, if he could not have her attention, he would ensure no one else did either. Devon approached their table with practiced charm, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, like peace offerings. "Celeste, I thought you might need this," he said smoothly, setting 1 cup before her before turning to Bennett with calculated condescension. "Quite an eventful evening for a charity date, isn't it?" Devon's smile did not reach his eyes. "Though I suppose Celeste mentioned our firm's community outreach program. We've been pairing executives with people from different socio-economic backgrounds. Very progressive, good for corporate image." He clapped Bennett on the shoulder with false camaraderie. "I think it's admirable what you're doing, participating in this. Not everyone would be comfortable being someone's good deed project." The words landed with surgical precision. Bennett's face went completely still, his hand withdrawing from Celeste's as though burned. Celeste stared at Devon with dawning horror, understanding immediately what he was attempting, what poison he was introducing into something fragile and new. "That's completely false," Celeste said sharply, her attorney voice emerging cold and cutting. "Devon, that's a malicious lie. There is no charity program. But damage spreads faster than truth." Bennett stood, his movements mechanical, his expression shuttered. "It's fine," he said quietly, and the emptiness in his voice was worse than anger. "Thank you for helping with Ruby. I appreciate it." He lifted his daughter, blankets and all, and moved to a booth across the restaurant, his back to Celeste, his shoulders rigid with hurt. Every fear he had carried into this evening, every expectation of inadequacy, had been confirmed. Of course, someone like Celeste would not genuinely be interested in someone like him. Of course, this had been pity or obligation or some corporate exercise in appearing compassionate. Celeste turned to Devon with fury radiating from her. "Get away from me," she said, her voice shaking. "You're a petty, cruel man, and you just hurt someone who has been through enough." "I hurt someone." Devon scarfed. "I was protecting you from making a mistake, reminding you of your actual worth." "I know exactly my worth," Celeste said coldly. "I'm someone who just realized I've wasted years working alongside people like you." She wanted to go to Bennett, to explain, to somehow undo what Devon had poisoned. But the distance between their booths felt impossible to cross, and Bennett's pasture radiated "leave me alone" in every line. Ruby, however, had heard everything. When Bennett dozed from exhaustion, she slipped from his arms and padded across the restaurant in sock feet, standing before Celeste's table with her bare clutched to her chest. "You made Daddy sad," Ruby said without accusation, only observation. "I didn't mean to," Celeste whispered, tears finally falling. "That man lied. I didn't know tonight would be important. I thought it would be another disappointing evening. But then I met you and your father, and everything changed." Ruby studied her with those 2 wise green eyes before climbing uninvited into the booth beside Celeste. "Daddy thinks nobody will ever love him again because Mama's gone. He thinks he's too broken." She took Celeste's hand with perfect trust. "But you're broken too. I can tell. You came to find me in the snow anyway." "I am broken," Celeste admitted. "I've been broken for a very long time." "Maybe broken people can fix each other," Ruby said with the simple wisdom of children. "Like when Daddy glues my toys. To broken pieces make one whole thing." She leaned against Celeste's side. "I think you're the one, even if Daddy's too scared right now." The storm finally began loosening its grip as dawn approached. Snow plows rumbled past, orange lights flashing through windows. The manager announced streets were being cleared, that transit would resume within hours. People began gathering belongings, checking phones, preparing to return to interrupted lives. Bennett approached Celeste's table slowly, Ruby asleep against her shoulder. "I should take her," he said quietly. Celeste looked up at him with eyes raw from crying, from exhaustion, from the weight of honesty. "I'm not a charity case, and you're not mine." What Devon said was cruel and false. "I don't expect you to believe me, but I need you to know it's true." Bennett was silent for a long moment before sitting across from her. "I want to believe you, but I've spent 4 years believing that what I had with Victoria was once in a lifetime. That trying for anything else was foolish. Tonight, for the first time, I felt something that wasn't just grief, and it terrified me." When Devon said what he said, part of me was almost relieved, because fear is easier than hope. "I know," Celeste said. "I know exactly what you mean, because I felt it too, that terrifying possibility that maybe I could try again. When you pulled away, I wanted to let you go, to prove to myself that I was right not to trust anyone. But then Ruby reminded me that being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing it anyway." Bennett looked at Celeste's outstretched hand, palm up, an offering. "I don't know what happens next. I don't know if we're too broken or too scared. But I know I don't want to walk away without trying, without at least being honest. I haven't felt this much in 4 years, and yes, it hurts. But it also feels like maybe I'm still alive." He placed his hand in hers, their fingers intertwining. Ruby stirred between them, murmuring something that sounded suspiciously like, "Finally." By mid-morning, streets were passable. Bennett, Celeste, and Ruby stood in the bistro entrance, the moment heavy with everything unsaid, with all the fear they had not yet conquered. "Can I see you again?" Bennett asked, awkward but sincere. "Properly, I mean, yes," Celeste said, and her smile was genuine for the first time. "I'd like that very much." Ruby tugged on Celeste's ruined coat. "Can you come to our house for Christmas? We make paper snowflakes. Daddy's not very good, but I can teach you." Celeste knelt to Ruby's level, her heart expanding in ways she had forgotten were possible. "I would be honored to make snowflakes with you." 3 days passed. Days of careful texts and late-night phone calls, of learning the contours of each other's grief and hope. Bennett discovered that Celeste loved terrible puns and drank hot chocolate with excessive marshmallows, that she had wanted to paint professionally before all school consumed that dream. Celeste learned that Bennett sang off-key to classic rock when he cooked, that he kept Victoria's wedding ring not out of inability to let go, but as a promise to honor where he came from. On Christmas Eve, Celeste stood outside Bennett's apartment building, breathing cold air, steadying herself. This was the moment when she would either step fully into the possibility of love again or retreat to the safety of solitude. She chose courage, chose hope, chose the chance to become whole. Bennett answered the door in a flour-dusted apron, the apartment smelling of baking cookies and cinnamon and home. Ruby squealed and launched herself at Celeste, who caught her with a laugh, so pure it seemed to fill every corner of the small space. They spent the evening cutting paper snowflakes, each one unique and imperfect, hanging them in windows where they caught light from a modest Christmas tree decorated with handmade ornaments. When Ruby fell asleep on the couch wrapped in blankets, Bennett and Celeste stood by the window, watching gentle snow begin to fall again. "I've been so afraid," Bennett admitted. "Afraid that letting you in meant letting go of Victoria, that I'd be betraying her memory. And now," Celeste asked gently, "now I think maybe she'd want me to be happy again, to give Ruby a full life, to not spend the rest of my days just surviving." He turned to face Celeste, taking both her hands. "You make me want to live again, not just exist. And that's terrifying, but it's also the best thing I've felt in years." Celeste leaned her forehead against his. "I spent so long thinking love was something that would destroy me again. But with you, it feels different. It feels like maybe we can build something new from all our broken pieces." The clock struck midnight, Christmas arriving with quiet certainty. Bennett cupped Celeste's face in his calloused hands and kissed her, gentle and reverent and full of promise. When they pulled apart, they found Ruby sitting up on the couch, grinning sleepily. "I told you," the little girl said, supremely satisfied. "She's the one, Daddy." Bennett laughed, a sound of pure happiness that Celeste felt in her chest, like coming home. He pulled her close as Ruby joined them at the window, the three of them silhouetted against falling snow. Outside, the city sparkled with Christmas lights, but inside this small apartment, real magic was quieter, deeper. A family was being born from grief and hope in equal measure. From two people brave enough to try again. From a child wise enough to see what adults tried to deny. The paper snowflakes spun gently in warm air, each one different, each one beautiful, each one a small miracle hanging in the window, like a promise that broken things, given time and love and courage, could become whole again.